So we continue in Genesis chapter 39, verses 16 to 20. Now, what had just happened was that the mistress, Potiphar's wife, had just put on a big act. She held the garment in her hand and was telling them how Joseph was trying to overcome her and molest her. So we continue. You see, what happened was then afterwards, she held on to the garment. Let's read this. After her masterful performance at acting in front of the household slaves, the mistress set Joseph's garment aside, as verse 16 states. And she laid up his garment by her until the Lord came home. She waited and gathered her thoughts and practiced in her mind what she should say. She had just told them how Joseph tried to get her and she screamed, and of course her story didn't add up, did it? And now she folded up the garment, put it on her side so nobody could see it until the Lord would come home so she could present a dramatic story. She used the same words, but leaving out that she blamed her husband. Of course, if she's talking to her husband, she's not going to say, I blame you. No. And she spoke unto him according to these words. So where are we now? In the next verse. Saying, the Hebrew servant which thou hast brought unto us came in unto me to mock me. Now, this part of her story was almost identical in wording to what we read in verse 14, where the word translated to mock is the same Hebrew word as is used in Genesis 26, verse 8, which says, and it came to pass, when he had been there a long time, that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out of the window and saw, and behold, Isaac was sporting with Rebekah, his wife. Isaac had claimed to the king that Rebekah was his sister. That's back in Genesis 26. But Abimelech, the king, saw Isaac sporting with Rebekah, and therefore realized Rebekah was actually Isaac's wife. That word of sporting with Rebekah was actually the word that he was kind of familiar, touching her in an appropriate spot, whatever. That is the same word she used for mocking her. How could you imagine Joseph doing that? No. So in using this particular Hebrew word, which I'm not going to pronounce, Moses was telling us Potiphar's wife clearly tried to convince him that Joseph was flirting with her to seduce her. This word is only used 3 times in the book of Genesis. And those 3 times was when mocking, it meant sexual mocking. It meant mocking in a vulgar way. She continued, and it came to pass as I lifted up my voice, she says, and cried that he left his garment with me and fled out. At this point of her account, she must have brought forth the garment and showed it to him. And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke unto him, saying, after the manner did that servant, your servant, to me. She didn't call him our servant, she called him your servant. that his wrath was kindled. Wow! Now this is something. His wrath was kindled. Was it against himself for promoting Joseph, the Hebrew, to a most trusted high position only to be betrayed? His wrath was kindled. Was it against Joseph as he believed her story, though not put together very well? His wrath was kindled. Was he angry knowing that what he had to do to save face as an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard? He knew he had to do something. So we read, and Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. Now, being a high-ranking officer and being captain of the guard, Potiphar had power to execute directly those whom he arrested. Yes, he had the power to kill them. As such, Potiphar scarcely believed his lustful wife's story. I don't think he did. Although most commentaries think that he charged Joseph and believed his wife. But really, you see, he did not believe his lustful wife's story, or he would have killed Joseph at once. So instead, he consigned him to prison to both save face and make it look good to his wife. Now, how long Joseph actually stayed in prison was never mentioned. It just simply says he was there in the prison. How long he stayed there was never mentioned, but chapter 37 states that when Joseph was sold and came to Egypt, he was 17 years old. And when he appeared before Pharaoh, years later, as recorded in Genesis 41:46, he was 30 years old. So that would make the total time spent in Potiphar's household and prison 13 years. The longest time was probably spent in Potiphar's home. Otherwise, he couldn't have earned the position of being the man in charge. Otherwise, he couldn't have earned Potiphar's trust. It would be 13 years for Joseph to advance from being a powerless slave, to the second most powerful person on earth. Better yet, just days before being released, Joseph might have been tempted to give up on God. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever felt that way? Then suddenly he was in charge, the one and only assistant Pharaoh. I sense many believers watching me right now, or believers reading what I wrote, maybe struggling in their lives to the point of completely giving up. I know I've been there. There was a time in my life where I had it so tough, I wanted to give up. Why, God? Why are you letting me go through this? If you feel that way to you, I'm telling you right now, don't give up on the brink of a miracle. Don't give up. Dear child, you're not alone. Don't give up on the brink of a miracle. Don't give up. God is still on the throne. And I remember somebody singing that. Don't give up on the brink of a miracle. Don't give up, dear child, you're not alone. Don't give up on the brink of a miracle. Don't give up. God is still on the throne.